rocking them through. Let the bass from the speakers run through your sneakers. Move both your feet and run to the beat. Come run, run, run. Everybody move, run. Let me see you move.
All right, everyone,
Time to get
welcome
to the
once
moon because
again.
it's
So, we are just
time.
going to start
Everybody
from
is
where we
coming.
stopped in the last episode. We've been reviewing this book together, The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel, and we saw that in this book, this man basically talks about how people think when it comes to money, how people relate, because psychology definitely is the study of the mind, study of the behavior, basically. So, he's writing about how money behaves sometimes, of course, relating that to people's personal experiences. And last episode, we saw this chapter together, chapter 16, You and Me, where he spoke about the fact that um, we are all different, and when making decisions, most of the time, we should not judge our decision based on what someone else says. We should not judge our decisions. He talks about it with the fact that, of course, a day trader and a long term trader should not listen to advice from each other, because this one is trading to get benefits today, the other one is trading to get benefits in the future. So, we are different persons. So, you need to be mindful of who is influencing your decision or advising you on what best to do. Then in chapter 17, he talks about the seduction of pessimism. This chapter also stands out for me. Of course, not really too good, but he says one of the best way to invest is to have pessimism sometimes, to expect the worst. So when the worst happens, definitely you won't be surprised. Of course, sometimes this might not be the best advice. So pessimism, like you say, it sounds smart. Optimism sounds naive, but history rewards optimists. So pessimistic financial prediction gets clicks, feels credible, and seem more intelligent. But economists and market have given through wars, pandemic, and recession have grown. Sorry. So sometimes he just talks about that pessimism or the bad thing, expecting the bad thing. I think I was listening to an interview of the three piggyvest key founders, and they were saying that one of the best way to save is just to expect the worst thing to happen. Of course, and as Nigerians, that might be difficult. So in this book, the seduction of pessimism chapter, which is 17, talks about this, the fact that expecting the worst to happen actually helps sometimes when it comes to investing. And while even investing on something, expecting that the worst might happen is what will definitely make one not shocked if the worst later happens. So the key idea in this chapter was just about being cautious, right? And of course, you also be optimistic in the long term, but in the short term, just be cautious. Sometimes just expect the worst. So don't let the noise of scary headlines make you abandon a long term strategy that history consistently supports. Just like the last chapter that talks about, I think there was a part that talks about your surprise. Yes, this chapter 12. So surprises will always happen if you're investing long term, just like the you and me. Don't listen to someone that's just investing short term. Then chapter 8, about to be the last chapter, when you would believe anything. So the more you want something to be true, the more you believe the story. So I think he just talks about the fact that you should not just deceive yourselves with some appealing statements, or deceiving yourself about some appealing decisions. You always acknowledge the fact that you cannot always be right. So Husserl calls these appealing fictions, right? So we all have financial beliefs driven by what we want or what we know, not what is true sometimes. So hot stock tip, guaranteed returns, foolproof strategies, and all of that. We just all have our belief, but you need to acknowledge that not all your belief would be correct. So the key idea here is to guide your financial decisions from your own desires, from what you feel like you want. Just like we saw in the chapter that talked about the fact that you change. So you should acknowledge that when making financial decisions. So when something sounds too good to be true and you desperately want it to work, that's definitely a red flag, right? So if you mind what you believe in. Chapter 19, bringing them all together, which is the summary. He talked about the fact that you should save, which is an advice. Just give in this chapter. I gave a random summary of everything he spoke about, which is basically about saving, about giving the margin for error, about respecting compounding, right? You respect keeping things all together. You know, don't let ego drive how you spend, but you just learn to keep and to stay humble about luck. So none of these are individually complex. Of course, the hard part is applying them consistently, especially when emotion, social pressure, and market noise push you the other way. So then in verse 20, he just gave confession about what he does. So who said just shares his own personal financial approach, and it's not what most experts will recommend. He shares that he would recommend one to always save. For instance, he would say currently some financial experts I've seen and I've met, some investors I've seen and I've met would advise you not to save. But in the concluding part of this book, which is the last chapter, he recommends that you save. And like he says, him and his family lives beyond their means. It means if they earn, let's say, 1 million monthly, they spend about just 200K. That is how he feels it should be. And their saving is on the high rate. They save extremely high. So that's how I concluded this chapter. I've heard some persons say they do not like this book. Some persons I respect also say the book is not really that smart for people to read. However, I think the book just has some sense, especially when it comes to saving. So the key idea in this last chapter is that there's no single right financial plan, right? The best plan is the one that you can actually follow, of course, which is say the saving, and it will let you live where sometimes you can't predict what will happen in the future. I think 60 to 70% of what the writer talks about in this book is saving, and then the big lesson here is to do well with money as little as I wrote here. Doing well with money has little to do with how smart you are and a lot to do with how you behave. Like we said earlier, it is a psychology. It is sometimes people that are very disciplined tend to keep money well. People that are extravagant or behaves anyhow tend to spend anyhow. So sometimes when it comes to keeping money, when it comes to knowing how to spend money or even making money, one must first work on his character, how he behaves, what he does, what are the things he sees, he watches, the people that influences him, and all of that. So number one, behavior over intelligence, time over timing, and enough over more. Talks about this when it comes to greed. There's the part you get to, there's the point you get to where you see this is enough. So thank you so much for joining in to this part, the last episode for this book, The Psychology of Money. The next book would be announced on our official WhatsApp channel, and we'll be streaming together next week in our next episode. If we are not streaming next week, then it would be tomorrow for our next episode. We have a lot of books to read in the next 200 days. Thank you so much for joining in, and
You run, run, if you ready,
subscribe
move,
for
say
more. See
yeah.
you
One time for your mind, say
later.
yeah, yeah.